you've been experiencing low energy, brain fog, moody and gloomy feelings, maybe you feel cold easily, you might find it hard to motivate yourself to get out of bed, to move your body, to meet the challenges of your day and of your life, then this video is for you because we're going to be talking about how the root of many of those symptoms is actually the thyroid. And we'll be talking about all of the ways that you can optimize your thyroid function so that you can wake up with full energy, excited to start your day. You can think clearly, you can move your body in ways that feel good to you, and you can easily take action on your goals and fulfill your life purpose. I'm Karina. I'm a health and movement coach, and welcome to my channel where we discuss practical ways to elevate our wellness from a mind, body, soul perspective. Fatigue and weakness, muscle aches and pains, brain fog, moodiness, weight gain, these are all very common symptoms of an underactive thyroid. And this condition, sometimes called hypothyroidism, is becoming increasingly common against the backdrop of our modern lifestyle, especially among women. And even if you don't have full-blown hypothyroidism, if you're experiencing even some of the symptoms that we discussed, you may still need to look at optimizing your thyroid and your metabolic function, so you're still in the right place. So first, let's talk about what an optimal thyroid looks like in terms of key biomarkers that we can measure, and then we'll talk about how to get there through mind-body practices, key nutrients, optimizing our liver function, and regulating our metabolism through tweaks to our daily routine. Many traditional clinicians, when they're assessing thyroid function, will be looking just at TSH and maybe T4, and these are important biomarkers. TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. This is the hormone that the pituitary gland releases in order to get the thyroid gland to start producing thyroid hormone. So it's this cascade effect, which is the case with a lot of our hormones. And then we're also looking at T4, which is the thyroxine molecule, and this is what the thyroid gland directly produces. TSH should ideally be between 1 and 2 microinternational units per liter. T4 should ideally be between 1 and 1.5 nanograms per deciliter. But we also want to be looking at free T3, triiodothyronine. And this gets converted from T4 into the biologically active form of thyroid hormone, the form that the body can actually use. And this should ideally be between 3 and 4.4 picograms per milliliter. So commonly, someone with hypothyroidism will have a high TSH, higher than 2 microinternational units per liter. They may also have a low T4, but even more commonly, they'll have a low T3. And they'll also have a high reverse T3 of higher than 8 to 10 nanograms per deciliter. Reverse T3 is a thyroid hormone metabolite. Basically, that means that it's kind of like a waste product of thyroid hormone. It's biologically inactive. So when this is high, that means that there's not a lot of usable thyroid hormone in the body. Then you also may want to look at the thyroid antibodies, anti-TPO and anti-TG, to see if there's an autoimmune component to this, which is where the body attacks its own proteins that are needed to make thyroid hormone because the body is mistaking these proteins for foreign invaders. So ideally, anti-TPO should be below 9 international units per milliliter, and anti-TG should be below 1 international unit per milliliter. So once you've gotten a pretty good picture of your thyroid via these thyroid biomarkers, or maybe you haven't gotten a chance to get these tested yet, but you have some symptoms and you just want to optimize your thyroid function, then the first step is to address cortisol production through mind-body practices. Cortisol production, high cortisol, can suppress thyroid function, and then in the reverse, low thyroid or hypothyroidism can actually increase cortisol production. And so this is something that we want to address right away. And so the first mind-body practice is to get to know your limits, whether that's work commitments, household responsibilities, commitments to loved ones. See where you may be giving more than your capacity. You can simply reflect on this in some quiet time by yourself, meditating maybe. You could journal about this. And then establish some boundaries for how much you are able to give to these commitments without depleting yourself. And then assess what is one area of your life where you can allow yourself more time to slow down and bring a little more mindfulness to it. So maybe that means delegating one item on your 10-item to-do list so that you can leave 10 minutes early so you don't have to rush to get to work. And then on your commute to work, you can practice slow breathing. You can notice each footfall as you walk. You can notice the scenery around you. And then in addition to these more reflective cognitive exercises, you can also incorporate some more practical hands-on tools, specifically some breathing exercises that are going to help you to feel more emotionally stable and regulate your cortisol production. Even just 5 minutes of this a day, whether that's right before bed or maybe sitting at your desk, that can go a long way. So the first breathing exercise is called box breathing. This is where you're going to inhale for 4 slow counts. Make sure that inhale is expanding 360 degrees across the rib cage. And then you'll hold the breath at the top of that inhale for 4 counts. Then you'll exhale for 4 slow counts, and you'll hold the breath at the bottom of that exhale for 4 counts. And a second breathing exercise that you can do is called alternate nostril breathing. That's where you take your thumb and your peace fingers. You're going to inhale through both nostrils. Then you're going to close both nostrils and hold for 2 counts. And then you'll open just the left nostril by releasing your ring finger and exhale the breath out just through that nostril for 4 slow counts. Then you inhale through that same left nostril for 4. You hold both nostrils for 4, and then you exhale out through the right nostril for 4. Inhale through that same right nostril for 4. Hold both nostrils for 2. Exhale through the left nostril for 4. Now, it is worth noting that if you are doing this particular breathing exercise right before bed, it's better to just let the breath out through just the left nostril rather than alternating between left and right, because the left nostril represents that more passive, surrendering, restful energy, whereas the right nostril represents the higher energy, the more active energy. And so we don't want to be necessarily activating that just before bed, just before we're winding down for the night. Now, the second thing that we want to be looking at in terms of optimizing our thyroid is key nutrients that support the thyroid. There's many of them that do this, but the key ones are selenium, iodine, copper, and zinc. Iodine is needed for the thyroid gland to make the molecules that are the building blocks for T3 and T4, and selenium is needed to convert T4 to T3, which, remember, we said was the biologically active form of thyroid hormone and arguably one of the most important biomarkers that we should be looking to move the needle on. Now, here's the thing about these nutrients. They are trace minerals, which means that they exist in this delicate balance with each other in the body. So it is very easy, if we are supplementing, to overdo it. One of the most common examples of this that I see is people who are supplementing with zinc. Often these are vegans and vegetarians. They know they're not getting it through their diet, so they're supplementing, and that's a smart choice. But sometimes they can over supplement where they then throw off their copper levels. Another example is when people are over supplementing with iodine, sometimes taking 1,000 micrograms of iodine when we really only need 100 to 200. And so in my view, the best way to get these nutrients is to get them from whole foods where they already exist in their optimal ratios. A great source of iodine is milk. I recommend consuming this raw because it still has the enzymes intact that are needed to digest it properly. But if you're not getting it raw, then at least A2 and organic. Some people still can't tolerate the lactose from cow's milk, in which case you may want to get goat's milk, which has lower lactose content. Or you could just ferment the cow's milk into a yogurt or a kefir. Some other good sources of iodine would be seaweed, shellfish, and eggs. And speaking of shellfish, oysters are some of the most micronutrient dense foods out there. So if you take nothing else from this video, it would be eat more oysters. They have iodine, selenium, copper, and zinc, and also so many other micronutrients. But specifically, oysters are well known for being one of the best sources of zinc. And then in terms of another good source of copper, beef liver really comes out on top. And I know this is not always everyone's favorite in terms of taste, especially if you're eating it directly. But there are ways that you could get it more indirectly, ground up with some ground beef so you don't taste the liver as much. A lot of companies will have a product like this. Sometimes it's called an ancestral blend. That's what Force of Nature has. There's lots of other companies that do this. And some other good sources of selenium would be, in addition to oysters, would be tuna, salmon, eggs to some degree, and Brazil nuts. With the nuts, I would recommend soaking and sprouting the nuts first to make them more nutritionally bioavailable. And then we also want to make sure that we're getting in enough vitamin D. because a lot of people across the board are deficient in vitamin D, but especially for people who have an autoimmune component to a thyroid condition like Hashimoto's or Graves', getting in enough vitamin D is really important to optimize the immune system. So whether that's getting in vitamin D naturally through the sunlight when the UV index is 3 or higher, or whether that's supplementing, and you may need to supplement if you're in a location where the UV index doesn't get that high in some seasons. So you want to make sure that you're getting vitamin D in some form. I have a video on all the details about how to get vitamin D linked here. Then in addition to getting in the key nutrients that you need, you also want to make sure that you're keeping tabs on the foods that you're eating that could actually inhibit the absorption of these nutrients, specifically goitrogenic foods, which can inhibit the uptake of iodine. These goitrogenic foods include cruciferous veggies like Brussels sprouts, broccoli, kale, also soy, peanuts, some grains like millet and cassava. Now, I'm not saying never eat these foods again. Just make sure you're moderating your intake of these foods, like you're not eating half a pound of kale in your smoothie because you think it's healthy if you're dealing with some thyroid issues. Now, if you're eating half a pound of kale every day and you love it and your thyroid hormones are excellent, then by all means keep doing it. But for a lot of people, including myself, limiting these goitrogenic foods has gone a long way in ensuring that the body can hold on to the essential nutrients that it needs. And lastly, on the nutrient front is that with a high stress lifestyle, it's very easy to deplete electrolytes. Now, we've already talked about some ways to manage and modulate stress with our mind-body practices, but in the aftermath of a stressful event, we want to make sure we're replenishing our body with those electrolytes, specifically calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium. Some good sources of these are spring water. I like Saratoga. Mountain Valley also has some good spring water that is generally free of PFAS, which is a hormone and endocrine disruptor. Coconut water is also a great source of electrolytes. Sometimes people will create an electrolyte cocktail with coconut water, orange juice, some salt, and some cream of tartar for that extra potassium. And if you are going through an unavoidably stressful time, and or if you're exercising high intensity exercise in the heat and the sun where you're sweating a lot, it may be beneficial to also supplement with some electrolyte mixes, ones that are free of added flavors and sugars, and or some magnesium, because this gets depleted very easily in people when they're going through stress. So we've talked about mind-body practices, we've talked about key nutrients. Now, the third factor to look at is actually something that's applicable to virtually all health conditions, not just thyroid. And that is sources of inflammation, both dietary and environmental sources. One of the most common dietary sources of inflammation are seed oils. Industrially processed seed oils are everywhere these days. Whether you're eating out, lots of restaurants will cook with them. And if you get even seemingly healthy organic snacks at the grocery store, a lot of them will have these seed oils in them. Specifically, these are sunflower, safflower, canola, and soybean oil. And they are processed at high heat. They're polyunsaturated fats that are very vulnerable to oxidation. So they're already highly oxidized when they're in the bottle for you to consume. So not only can your body not use these as a valid source of energy, but these oils will just ravage through your cell membranes, which are also polyunsaturated fats vulnerable to oxidation. And so it's not only not nutritionally beneficial, but it is also highly inflammatory. And then another dietary source of inflammation is an overconsumption of refined sugars, whether that's high fructose corn syrup or even something that seems like it's healthier is still pretty processed, like coconut sugar. Not saying never have coconut sugar in whatever you're eating ever, but just limit your intake. And then in terms of environmental sources of inflammation, these are things that you can control by limiting your exposure to, things like mold, air, and water pollutants. At the baseline level, it's great to get a HEPA certified air filter. Pretty easy to find options online at a variety of price points for this. And then also a good quality water filter. Berkey has a lot of options that will filter out most contaminants. You could also get a reverse osmosis water filter. And then in addition to some of these environmental sources, Chronic stress is also highly inflammatory. So we've already addressed this with our mind-body practices that not only reduce cortisol, but also inflammation in the body. But I also have a whole video on specific practices that you can use to regulate your nervous system that's linked here. And then the fourth factor to look at to optimize your thyroid is actually going to be optimizing liver function, because the liver is where thyroid hormone conversion happens. The liver is really the workhorse of the body. It is involved in so many different functions. It stores and releases glucose. It's involved in digestion, in detox, in hormone production, in hormone detoxification, so many different functions. And so we want to make sure that our liver is in top shape. One of the best ways to assess liver function in terms of biomarkers would be through certain enzymes, specifically aspartate aminotransferase, also known as AST, and alanine transaminase, also known as ALT. Now, these are tests that you can get really easily through your primary care doctor. Often it is included in that regular health checkup that they will do. Not necessarily the thyroid hormones that we talked about at the beginning of this video, but definitely AST and ALT will be included. And when you look at these biomarkers, ideally AST should be under 30 units per liter for women, under 40 units per liter for men. For ALT, under 28 units per liter for women, under 36 units per liter for men. If these are elevated, it could mean that you are overburdening your liver with refined sugars, with alcohol, with an excess of energy in general. It could also mean that you might be exposed to environmental toxins that the liver is just overburdened by. So, for example, a few years ago when I got my liver enzymes tested, I actually had carbon monoxide poisoning and I didn't even know it. And I was wondering why my liver enzymes were so elevated. And then I got to the root cause of that. So it could be a lot of different factors. You want to be looking at environmental factors as well. And then it's also worth noting that if you're taking any medications or if you're doing really high intensity exercise that maybe your body is not quite used to, your liver enzymes could be elevated for that reason as well. Once you've taken off those burdens off of the liver, then in order to kind of repair the damage, you could also lean on some herbal supports like milk thistle to repair liver cell damage, or white peony and cinnamon to encourage phase 2 liver detox. And last but not least, because the thyroid is responsible for our metabolism, we want to be optimizing this as well by resetting our circadian rhythm, by monitoring our caloric intake, and by tweaking our meal times. When the body's circadian rhythm, aka the internal clock, is aligned, that means that we're storing and releasing nutrients at the right time. It means the body is producing insulin and releasing glucagon, stored glucose appropriately. It also means that autophagy, which is the cell's self-cleaning process, is happening on a regular basis. And the best way to reset your circadian rhythm, that sleep-wake cycle, is to get morning sunlight. Get outside, even if it's cloudy out, so that your body knows, okay, it's time to be awake and alert. And I know I need to suppress melatonin, the sleep hormone, until later when it gets dark. That's when I start to wind down, and that's when different bodily processes start to turn on. Then you want to be checking in also on when you're eating your meals. Are you eating large meals late at night? Because that's going to affect the way that your body is able to process and use the nutrients that you're giving it. Ideally, you want to stop eating 2 hours before bedtime at least to give your body time to digest before you sleep. You can even go as early as 3 to 4 hours before bedtime. Sometimes this is called early time restricted feeding. And in a lot of studies, this has been shown to improve key metabolic markers like insulin sensitivity and blood sugar levels. It's also been shown in some trials to help with weight loss. And then on a related note, you also want to be checking in on your fasting and how that's affecting you. This is going to vary depending on the individual. For me, I used to throw in 24-hour fasts a couple times a month, and that became too much for me. I noticed that my basal metabolic rate began to decrease. So again, this is going to vary depending on the individual, but if you're fasting, you may want to check in on how you feel. And specifically, after your fast for days or maybe even weeks afterwards, do you notice reduced appetite? Not reduced appetite as in you're no longer ravenously hungry. That would be a good sign that you're not having cravings and things like this. But a suppressed appetite in terms of you're not hungry enough to get in the nutrients that you need, including at least 90 grams of protein per day. that might be a sign that you might want to look at your fasting habits and reassess them. And then you also want to be mindful if you have a menstrual cycle of when you're fasting. You want to avoid fasting on days around 11 through 15 of your cycle when ovulation is happening, and also in your luteal phase, that week leading up to menstruation, starting around day 21 until menstruation, because those are the times when your body needs nourishment and doesn't respond as well to stress, even seemingly positive stressors like fasting. Lastly, along these lines, is you want to be checking in on your caloric intake. Sometimes this may be about eating too many calories, but usually with low thyroid, it's actually about eating too few, because sometimes 1,200 calories a day can be normalized, but you might want to honestly ask yourself if that or around that is enough for you to meet your nutritional needs, like those 90 grams of protein minimum per day and all the micronutrients that we talked about earlier. A good way to assess what your caloric needs actually are is to use a calculator like the Mifflin St. Jeor calculator, which is going to figure out your basal metabolic rate depending on your activity level. For me, I usually consume around 1,800 calories per day, and that feels good to me, but you can calculate your own specific level using an equation like the one I just mentioned. So if you're feeling low energy and sluggish, oftentimes it means that your thyroid is calling out for support. And the best way to support your thyroid is to address the 5 factors that we mentioned in this video. Number 1, regulate your nervous system and reduce cortisol through mind-body practices. Number 2, get in the essential nutrients for thyroid health. Number 3, reduce sources of inflammation from your diet and your environment. Number 4, support your liver. And number 5, regulate your metabolism and circadian rhythm through morning sunlight, adjusting your meal timings, and caloric intake. If you want a more structured step-by-step approach to addressing not just your thyroid, but all of the factors that may be influencing your energy levels and your health overall, then the masterclass for superhuman level health could be a really great option for you. We go through step-by-step the 3 pillars of radiant health and how to incorporate them into your life right now. And the link to join that is in the description box. If you found this video helpful, then please give it a like and share it with someone else who may be struggling with low energy and thyroid issues who could really benefit from this. And if you want to learn about more ways to feel absolutely amazing in your body and your mind, then feel free to subscribe to this channel. Lots of love, and I'll talk to you soon.